Okay everybody, welcome to this video. Predictability in powerlifting is one of the most important things to perfect and get right, especially once you've trained for longer than 6 months and you're actually an intermediate. Predictability is the difference between beginners and advanced lifters, period. It is so critical. And why am I so confident in saying that it's so important? Well, we're about to get into that. I was brainstorming about 2 to 3 pages of ideas when I made this video because I really wanted to get all the nuance and all the nitty-gritty out about this idea because it is something I've been thinking about for a very long time. It's combining many different ideas, SFR, SRA, volume, intensity, recovery, environment, all these kind of important elements. To tell you what predictability is and my definition of it, I want to give you an analogy. I want to draw you up what I believe it is. If you, let's say deadlift Monday you do a deadlift, and then by Thursday, you're fully recovered. By Thursday, you're fully recovered and you're ready to do another session. That isn't groundbreaking. That is stimulus, fatigue, recovery. That's just SRA. That's a very common understanding of how we conceptualize training. You stimulate, you recover, and while you recover, you adapt, and the length of that curve illustrates the person. Okay, so why is this actually important? Well, what if for the first block of training, we get this effect? The second, we get this effect. All the way to the 5th week of our training block, if we are consistently recovered and fresh by Thursday, that is predictability. We can predict when the person's performance is going to show up, right? That doesn't sound groundbreaking either, but I'll give you an example of a bench press. I'll start from the back. Let's say Saturday is our competition day. And on this day, we want our heavy bench press single to predictably feel the strongest on Saturday during the week. Why? Well, because if we have several blocks leading up in a competition where the day we're going to compete, Saturday, is our strongest day, we can predict the performance on comp day perfectly. That is the idea of predictability. And so let's give an example of a bench press. On this day, you do your single, and it's a heavy single, so we'll just put it at 9, and you're training bench 4 times a week, so Saturday, Friday, and then we'll do Wednesday and Monday. Now, this is just a random example. So Friday, you want to do a primer, so let's say you do 4x1 at 80%, and then on Wednesday is our main volume day, so we might do like a 1x4 Larson, 3x6, and then we've got a 3x8 on chest press. And so here's the main volume day where we're trying to grow the most. And on Monday, because we are a little bit fatigued from this Saturday, we still can get some productive work in. However, it's not gonna be incredibly heavy. So this could be like a secondary tertiary day. Could be like 5x3 at 7 to 8, right? If I was an advanced lifter, I might have another Thursday session here where I would do potentially some singles. This is just a made up cycle. Point is, if we use the principles of predictability to see if this is gonna work, we can determine very accurately if your bench press is going to show up. I'll show you what I mean. Saturday, we want a heavy day. In order for us to express that strength, we need to ensure that we're not fatigued, okay? And if we go back to that same principle of stimulus, recovery, adaptation, we need to study how quickly it takes the person to recover. I'll give you an example. Wednesday is our big high intensity day. This is really where the meat and the potatoes of our program is on this Wednesday. And if Thursday the person is still very sore, Friday the person is like not that sore but not very strong, and then Saturday they feel very fresh and they're super duper strong, that tells us the recovery time, that SRA curve for the bench press with this volume is 3 days. 3 days it takes to fully dissipate fatigue and feel strong. Okay, so therefore, this split will work. And then why are we doing a Friday primer? Why are we doing the light session? Just because your strength is there, what about your technique? Technique recovery curves, so to speak. Generally, your technique drops way faster than your strength. And so especially on bench press, where bench press is so technical, it makes the biggest deal. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna do a 4x1, very light, maybe 80% of your max, or at least predicted max of the week. And it's just gonna be technique. It's going to be very little effects on fatigue, very little effects on recovery, might actually improve recovery because we're increasing blood flow and we're maintaining our technique and keeping it fresh. What happens is consistently Saturday shows up. That's great, Ashton. You've just explained predictability in the bench press. I'm going to ask you a question. What happens if the person comes into the gym and they go, I'm feeling really sore Monday. I'm going to put my Friday session on Monday. I'm going to do my Larson because it feels good. And then I'm gonna move this Monday session to Friday. completely switch the sessions. What's gonna happen? Well, let's go back to our principle of stimulus, recovery, adaptation. If we look at the original microcycle, we have Monday, which is a 5x3 at 7 to 8, a rest day, and then Wednesday. So this session takes 2 days to recover. And what they've done is they've swapped it for the Friday session. How the hell are you gonna recover on time when your heavy single is 2 days later? You see what I mean? This is why predictability is important. And one of the very important variables of using predictability is consistent training. Because if the individual comes in here and just starts moving things around because they feel good, it completely messes up the microcycle and it's game over. That's why we use predictability. And as elite level athletes do all the time, is we make very small adjustments block to block. And what we do is we look at the data and we look at the person's lifestyle and we go, okay, week 2 and 3 didn't feel good. And then you look at the prescriptions of loads and you go, oh, they went over their load cap on this last day, and very nuanced claims. That's why with elite lifters, what we do is we build a very solid base of strength to make progress. And in order to continue to drive that progress and predict the microcycle and continue to optimize, we make very small adjustments as we go. One variable at a time, very scientific method. This is what everyone's currently doing. They're taking these variables and they're going, takes 3 days to recover, move it to this day. They're very methodical with their thinking. Hopefully that was a good explanation of what predictability is. Now, I wanna make something very clear. Predictability is not about predicting the future. It is not about predicting the future. It is about standardizing things to make your training more consistent. It is unrealistic for me to expect that I can perfect an individual's training so much that every single day I know exactly how they're gonna feel regardless of what happens. That is not the case. People are humans. People have lives. Sometimes they get a phone call and their girlfriend breaks up with them. They don't sleep for 2 nights, they drop 2 kilos, and then their primary squats don't feel good. Oh, I wonder why. Because they're humans, right? There is always gonna be noise in the system. This is always gonna happen. If your training relies exclusively on the idea that they have to hit certain numbers on certain days, it will eventually succumb to the chances of life. The noise in the system will hit them one day and it's game over. We have to expect that no one is going to execute perfectly. The environment you set up in order to allow predictability to happen is very, very important. And what I mean by this is if a lifter has a lifestyle that is consistent, we can use that to our advantage. Take myself, for example. On Wednesday and Thursday are my big days at uni. And so those are the days I don't have time to train in the morning, which is my preferred go-to. The caffeine doesn't hit as hard. I'm more tired than usual. I'm less motivated. These are things that occur in my life. And so I need to be mindful of that in my programming. And if that is a consistent variable, we can use that in our programming to go, maybe we shouldn't put heavy deadlifts at 5 o'clock in the afternoon for Ashton Riddell after his uni. That's the idea, okay? But if we take someone who has a very consistent lifestyle, but has very inconsistent nutrition, very inconsistent sleep, what's gonna happen? Well, the person is going to absolutely struggle to hit their primary days. Because if you hit your light squat day, 3 days later you have your heavy squats. And for 2 of those days, you went out drinking and you didn't hit your protein and you slept poorly as a result. Do you expect your body to recover fast enough? Think back to the SRA curves. What's gonna happen on their primary day? Well, they're gonna be under-recovered. They're not gonna be able to show up. And so consider this as an analogy. If we want our training to be predictable, we need to constantly create an environment where the training is gonna show up. If your training feels shit 40% of the time, we're trying to aim to get that to 50, then 60, then 70, then 80, then 90. For me personally, if I'm on top of my shit, training feels good 95% of the time. And that's something I want to talk about as well, is you can be perfect with your predictions and yet you still don't achieve the things you want to achieve. This is one of my favorite quotes. Your sessions, 50% of the time, are below average. Average is average. Okay, 50% of the time, your sessions are below average. They don't feel above average. And 25% of the time, you're even below that average. You're in the bottom quarter of sessions, right? And so maybe, and this is the worst thing that ever happens, is final deadlift single before a competition, and it is a bottom 10% session. It is below the very average for your deadlift. That's like the once in a year session that feels absolute shit. It happened to be on a critical deadlift session. That happens. That's why we're athletes. And that's also why we're human. We can't predict these things perfectly. However, just because we can't predict it perfectly does not mean we shouldn't optimize for it. Obviously, when we say the average, you can push on average how your sessions feel. You can move the variables upwards so that you don't experience these super low bottoms most of the time with a couple variables. Stress, sleep, diet, consistent training days, consistent warm-ups, consistent training times. That's the key. If you're consistently creating routine in your lifestyle where you're hitting your protein and your calories and you're sleeping consistently up to the standards of what science deems as optimal. For example, are you getting that 2 to 2.2 grams of protein? Are you hitting sufficient calories? Are you in a surplus? If you're really trying to get as strong as possible. Are you sleeping 8 to 10 hours a night? By standardizing these variables, we create an environment where we can even assess predictability in the first place. And I'll give you a training example as well. I want to talk about accumulative fatigue. Let's say when you deadlift, you get 4.5 fatigue points. Why 4.5? I'm going to explain very soon. And every day that you recover and sleep well, it decreases by 1, okay? And if it's below 1, you can still deadlift. That's your maximum performance because we're always going to carry a layer of fatigue. That's just the reality. And so once the fatigue gets back down to 1, we deadlift again. However, what happened? Our fatigue, because we deadlifted at 1, now becomes 5.5. And so if we were to draw your fatigue over a block, it would look something like this. We'll call this fatigue, we'll call this time. And so week 1, you deadlift, and we get a big spike, and it comes down, big spike, comes down, big spike, comes down. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing an upwards trend in the amount of fatigue you're holding. Your body is holding this fatigue. And eventually, you get to here, and your systemic fatigue is so high, it is too much, you can't deadlift anymore. You can't add that 2.5 kilos, that 5 kilos to your top set. You stop making linear progress. That's when we deload. We basically stop giving such a strong stimulus. We let the body come back down to baseline and we go back up. And every time we get stronger. That is the, in essence, stimulus to fatigue ratio. Now, week 1, you do your single at 6. Very good boy. You did not overshoot. And I gave you another single at 6, but you instead decide, fuck it, misgroove, quote unquote, I'm gonna max out right now. And then what happens with this fatigue? It goes up to here, super high. Crazy amount of fatigue, psychologically, physiologically. Your joints and tendons are more beat up. And now what happens? That recovery curve takes way longer. The systemic fatigue you're carrying is now way higher. And what happens? At the very least, the best case scenario is you somehow manage to pull back the volume and you keep the block riding. A more likely answer is that you're going to then over-accumulate fatigue. You're going to hit your week 3, you're going to be too fatigued, you're going to have to deload early, and you miss out an entire week. You miss out on an extra 25% of productive training. Or you have absolutely terrible joints and you get injured because you keep pushing through anyway. That is why predictability with training is important. It isn't just lifestyle. If you begin to overshoot on your main compound movements, you accumulate fatigue too quickly. And when we were predicting for a 4-week mesocycle, you've now just shrunk it artificially and prematurely. And now guess what? You've missed out on training. I'm basing my predictions on the fact that you're not gonna fucking overshoot, and you overshoot. That's why in training, we give very specific RPEs, we give very specific load ranges for those who can't handle RPE. It's why we calculate the volumes and intensities, and we are very methodical with our programming for intermediates. Is because a beginner can come into the gym, make progress just by maxing out, quite literally, which is insane. But as you get to an intermediate, you have to be careful. You have to be calculated. And if you're not, your SFR suffers, your systemic fatigue suffers, and predictability is thrown out, absolutely thrown out. Right, that is all I have for you today. I'm trying to produce as much educational content for powerlifting as I possibly can. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe. It lets me know that you enjoyed this video, and then I'll see you in the next one.